Meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 65 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Health. Today we will continue our study of the oversight of medical devices, breast implant registry during the first hour. We're then going to proceed to committee business in camera for the second hour. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. I'd like to make the following comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Both of our witnesses are appearing by video conference today. So for those appearing by video conference, just click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for you, you have the choice on the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. Please don't take screenshots or photos of your screen. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. In accordance with our routine motion, I'm informing the committee that all remote participants have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. I would now like to welcome the witnesses who have joined us by video conference today. We have Dr. Peter Lennox, Clinical Professor, Division of Plastic Surgery at the University of British Columbia, and Dr. Stephen Nicolaitis, Assistant Professor of Surgery, l'Université de Montréal. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. We're going to start with you, Dr. Lennox. You have 5 minutes for an opening statement. Welcome to the committee. The floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak before you. By way of background, I'm a past president of the Canadian Society of Plastic Surgeons and the Canadian Society of Aesthetic Plastic Surgeons. And my tenure in those roles coincided with the significant increase in the number of breast implant-associated anaplastic large cell lymphoma cases in Canada, which our members were seeing clinically. And at that time, there was a significant gap between the numbers that Health Canada had and that our members were seeing in clinical practice. And so we started tracking those numbers voluntarily and created a database that our societies still maintain. And I started communications with Health Canada at that time to try and get a better sense of breast implant, specifically at that time ALCL, and had multiple conversations with them. And this is around 2016, 2017. And at that time, it was our society's recommendation that there should be a breast implant registry in Canada so that we had better information for an event like ALCL. Unfortunately, the communication that was given back to us was that was not the mandate of Health Canada, which seemed a bit unusual to us, that the organization tasked with approving the safety of medical devices was not within their mandate to continue to track those devices long term. And certainly there is already exists medical device registries in Canada, and the largest one is the Orthopedic Joint Registry, which is managed by CIHI. And so our organizations have approached CIHI in the past, again, without any success. And we're the only G7 country that does not have a breast implant registry, which is concerning. Subsequently, I think because of the work that we did, I have been asked to speak internationally on medical device registries, and I provided that sort of a copy of one of those talks to you. And there's very good, clear evidence about the value of medical device registries and breast implant registries in particular, and there's clear guidelines as to what constitutes an effective registry. So that work has been done. It doesn't have to be duplicated. And I'm happy to answer questions about that type of what data needs to be collected. So it's my sincere personal belief as somebody who treats women, both reconstructive breast implants and aesthetic breast implants, that the time is here for a breast implant registry in Canada. And I believe it's the belief of our professional organizations as well. It would allow us to have more accurate information to give to Canadian women regarding the risks and benefits of these devices, and also allow the opportunity to track them long term. If events like anaplastic large cell lymphoma develop in the future, we'd have a way of tracking those patients and providing accurate information to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lennox. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Nicolaitis, Stephen Nicolaitis, Assistant Professor of Surgery at l'Université de Montréal. Dr. Nicolaitis, you have the floor for the next 5 minutes. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to you, present to you. As a Greek, I guess my presentation is a little bit more emotional. Apologize. But I just want to point out you're going to be hearing from some patients like Julie Elliott, Terry McGregor, who've now spend the better part of their lives as breast implant safety advocates. And there's thousands more just like them. And it's because their lives were turned upside down by breast implants. And many Canadian women have now died as a direct result of breast implants. And yet, as a physician, despite being plastic surgeon, my oath, Hippocratic oath, is do no harm. I'm here because I consider that my specialty of plastic surgery, along with the breast implant companies, has failed patients on a colossal scale by not identifying and addressing the various problems caused by breast implants in a timely manner. And had there been a registry from the beginning, these problems would have been recognized, obliging breast implant companies to be more proactive rather than reactive. Instead, patients have had to pay the price by falling ill or worse yet, dying. Breast implants were introduced in 1962, and within a year, there were patients with inflammatory conditions and what is now referred to as breast implant illness, or BII. So Dr. Lennox was talking about ALCL, which I'll address a little bit, but I'm focusing a little bit on breast implant illness. In the absence of a registry, these individual complaints were brushed aside by both breast implant companies and plastic surgeons with the claim that breast implants were completely benign. This is way back when, in 1963. And instead, patients were made to feel as though they had mental illness. No studies were performed by the breast implant companies. They were too busy making money. These patient complaints and no studies continued for 30 years leading up to the famous Dow Corning lawsuit settlement between 1994 and 1998. The Food and Drug Administration in the US was compelled to withdraw gel implants from the market in 1992 because the breast implant companies had failed to ensure and document safety of their implants. And in the following years, a number of small studies suggested safety of breast implants. But the problem is that these studies that appeared were performed by plastic surgeons who were receiving funding from breast implant companies. Conflict of interest is a huge problem when it comes to breast implant safety. And it's easy enough to understand that a plastic surgeon who's being paid by a breast implant company cannot be relied upon to study breast implants in a neutral fashion. And moreover, with an illness as complex and multifactorial as BII, large studies with thousands of patients have to be performed, something that can only be achieved with a registry. And in fact, Frizik and Wattad looked at thousands of patients in the Danish and Israeli registries, respectively, and they found that patients with breast implants did, in fact, have a higher incidence of rheumatic problems. But nevertheless, these numerous small studies performed by breast implant consultants suggested the safety of breast implants, along with a huge push from $1 billion industry, and that convinced the FDA to return gel implants to the market in 2006. And for another 10 years, patients continued to experience BI, but now they were told the studies by reputable American plastic surgeons proved that breast implants were benign. And if it weren't for the recognition of that lymphoma that Dr. Lennox referred to, caused by textured implants in 2016, breast implants would still be telling, the companies would still be telling patients that their implants were perfectly benign. Given the absence of a registry, as Dr. Lennox mentioned, this lymphoma was felt to occur in very rarely, in a million, they said 1 in a million cases, such that some plastic surgeons even question whether they should mention the risk of lymphoma to patients. And to give you an idea just how bad conflict of interest can get, a leading breast implant consultant in the US was so defensive of breast implants that he argued that lymphoma was caused by poor surgical technique rather than implant texturing. And that issue may have delayed the voluntary recall of BioCell implants, which are now recognized to result in lymphoma in somewhere in the order of 1 in 400 cases, hardly 1 in a million. So here I am sitting in front of you 61 years after the introduction of breast implants. I'm taking out breast implants that are making my patients sick and that my colleagues keep putting in. And when they ask me the simple question of why they're getting sick from their breast implants, I don't have a definitive answer to give them because we don't have enough data. And why? Because we don't have a registry. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Nicolaitis. We're going to begin now with rounds of questions, starting with the Conservatives. Dr. Ellis, please, for 6 minutes.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you to our two plastic surgeons being here today. Obviously, this is an important study that we need to get right on behalf of Canadians. If I might start through you, Chair, with Dr. Lennox. You talked about the orthopedic joint registry, which obviously exists within CIHI. Very simply, the question is could the breast implant registry be piggybacked upon the CIHI registry? I realize these are not orthopedic devices. That being said, if that style of registry already exists, why do we need to recreate another one? We need a patient registry. I'd like your thoughts on that, sir, if I might. Thank you.
That's an excellent question, and I think that I don't know all the specific data points of the orthopedic joint registry, as I've never had to access it or used it or uploaded patients to it. But I think that the format and certainly being housed by CIHI, one of the criteria for a good registry is that it be independently housed and independently funded, and so government or university are the logical places. So CIHI would be an excellent place, and you could certainly piggyback it in terms of the location of the data and how the data is stored and accessed. The specifics in terms of the data that you collect and how it's identified and everything, I'm not exactly familiar with the orthopedic one, but it would certainly be a reasonable model to start with.
Well, thank you very much. And once again, through you, Chair, to Dr. Lennox, to me this sounds self-evident, but obviously this hasn't been done, and Dr. Nicolaitis talked about this being 61 years since implants have been offered. But is there any downside to having a registry? I mean, obviously there's cost, but what are the other potential downsides?
There are some criticisms that have been raised of a registry. Specifically, there's some criticisms around consent, which if it's in the medical world, if it's a quality registry, you don't actually have to have patient consent. And how you collect the data. So an opt-out registry is the one that's the most effective, meaning that patients have to specifically ask not to be included as opposed to asking to be included. One of the other criticisms is, what do you actually do with the data? I mean, any registry or any research tool is only as good as the data that's put into it. So you have to maintain a registry and keep track and make sure that the data is updated. But the bottom line, I think, is there is no downside to having a registry, and it will hopefully allow us to see these things developing in real time, as opposed to, as Dr. Nicolaitis said, having to react and scramble to provide appropriate care and notify patients. That was one of the hardest things with the ALCL issue, is tracking down patients who had textured implants, because there was no repository, and even the implant manufacturer companies who were supposed to track that data actually didn't do it effectively.
Well, thank you very much, and through you, Chair, to Dr. Nicolaitis. I mean, obviously, I was a family doctor for a long time, but it seems unconscionable that we would put things in people's body without knowing whose they were in and what the serial numbers were and those kinds of things. I mean, could you imagine someone putting in a pacemaker and not knowing if there were a recall on it? I mean, it seems absolutely ludicrous. And I guess I can't understand why CIHI or any other government agency would hesitate on this. That being said, my question for you, sir, is do we need more study on implants in general? And would you encourage a study here at the Health Committee with a view to making recommendations to Health Canada with respect to the safety of implants. Are we there now, or do we need the registry first to gather more data? Maybe you could give us an idea around that, if you would, Dr. Nicolaitis.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is, as I said, they've been around for a long time, and it's easy enough to say, let's do some research and prove their safety. That was sort of done in a half-assed fashion after the withdrawal of gel implants in the U.S. The bottom line is numbers. It's to really understand these things, you have to look at huge numbers, not 20, 30 patients that have classically been done in the typical studies that were done by the implant companies and their consultants. You need thousands of patients. So that's where the data comes in. I think it's not a question of trying to reinvent the wheel. They have a registry in the U.S. Which is collecting data. It's, as Dr. Lennox mentioned, the data is it's okay, but it certainly, we need to tweak the data to get better information. But it's really with large numbers that we're going to be able to figure things out. The implant companies have, pushed these implants forward over the past 60 years with different variations like the texturing, which was meant to decrease contracture rates. But, if just to take that as an example, okay, so they figured out if we texture an implant, then it's going to decrease contracture rates. And then we find out, unfortunately, 7 or 8 years later, they were introduced in the 90s. So we ended up not even recognizing it until about 2011. So it took 20 years, give or take, before they started recognizing the lymphoma. Now, the numbers tell us that the lymphoma typically develops around 7 to 8 years after. So, yeah, a number of people died unnecessarily because of that lag time, because we didn't have a registry to pick these things up.
Thank you, Dr. Nicolaitis. Next, we're going to go to Dr. Pawlowski, please, for 6 minutes.
Good morning to the witnesses. I like Dr. Ellis, was a doctor for a lot of years. I worked in an emergency room. I'm not familiar with this subject. I want to really thank my colleague Luc Thériault for bringing this to the committee. It's not a subject I'm familiar with, so I'd like to kind of understand more the nature of this beast, the nature of the problem. And so I've got some kind of background questions. I think it was you, Dr. Nicolaitis, who mentioned women have died from ALCL, that's what, anaplastic large cell lymphoma. In Canada, do you have numbers as to how many women have died, and either in Canada or globally, and what the incidence is with breast implants, and which breast implants?
Yeah, so the latest numbers I have are 4 Canadian women dying from ALCL in Canada, okay? And I think it's 60 around the world. Dr. Lennox, correct me if my numbers are off, if you're aware. The incidence of the lymphoma of ALCL varies depending on the type of texturing. So micro-textured implants, such as the ones sold by Mentor, that means that they're not very rough, just slightly rough on the exterior, have an incidence of somewhere in the order of 1 in 17,000. But unfortunately, with the Allergan implants BioCell, the incidence is approximately 1 in 400. It might be as high as 1 in 100.
High, and how common have those been used?
So sorry, I didn't hear the first part of your question.
Well, you mentioned it could be as high as 1 in 100. With what sort of implant is that?
It's the BioCell implant that's made by Allergan.
And how many women have received those implants?
Oh boy. I don't know if that information is available. I'm not aware of the answer to that question in terms of Canadians or American patients.
Numbers you've quoted me, is that based on registry data from other countries or studies, or where does that come from?
Well, so unfortunately, it's not from registry data. What happened was because they have a registry in the U.S., the NBIR, but it's a voluntary registry that's relatively new, and they only have about 30% of plastic surgeons using it. If I understood correctly, basically what happened is once they identified the ALCL, it's been a huge problem getting accurate numbers from the breast implant companies. They sort of just were able to tell us, well, this is how much we sold of implants. And so then let's try to get, it's not clear what the numerator and the denominator are. So what ended up happening is one plastic surgeon in particular in New York, Peter Cordero, who was doing all his breast reconstructions with textured Allergan implants, collected his own data. He had a great follow-up with his patients, and those numbers are primarily coming from him. And he's found that the incidence is as high as 1 in 100 with his patients.
Now,
may I comment?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Sorry, not to disagree with Dr. Nicolaitis, but the numbers that I'm aware of, which are the current ones in the literature, Health Canada has reported 3 deaths. It's a bit unclear. So as I said, the Canadian Society of Plastic Surgeons and CSAPS both have also parallel tracked data from our surgeons, and our data is really robust. I know exactly like all of their scans, their outcomes, things like that. Health Canada's data is a bit less clear, so I don't know where their numbers are, how robust their data is. There's 36 cases globally, 36 deaths. The profile registry in the States, as Dr. Nicolaitis mentioned, they're a bit of an outlier. Their estimate is 1 in 30,000 still, which is the least common in the world. The implant manufacturers did provide numbers in terms of the denominator to us in Canada and also to Australia and New Zealand, not to us directly, but to statisticians, so that it was this, independent statisticians had those numerators. And the original estimates based on the Canadian data and the Australia and New Zealand data was around 1 in 3,000. Health Canada's current estimate is 1 in 1,600. Peter Cordero's, his personal one is 1 in 385, as Dr. Nicolaitis said. I actually met with Peter recently, and he hasn't had 1 in 100 yet in terms of his numbers or anything he's published. But that's certainly the highest risk, is 1 in 385. The current estimate globally for low textured implants is about 1 in 100,000 still. Sorry to interrupt. Those are the numbers that in the literature that I'm aware of.
I only have 13 seconds. So other than to say, it seems like I agree with you. I don't know. I can't really buy all the reasons for not having a registry. It seems something we need. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Pawlowski. Suite, Monsieur Thériault, pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Thériault, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Lennox and Dr. Nicolaitis, welcome. First of all, Mr. Chair, for the benefit of our study, I want it to be recorded in Hansard that we did invite practitioners who don't have the same position. So our 2 witnesses that are appearing today did agree to appear, Dr. Lennox and Dr. Nicolaitis, and I'm not trying to brag here, but as a bioesthetician, I'd like to say that you're an honor to your profession. Dr. Lennox, you're telling us that you did keep a registry. I looked at all of your documents. You have taught us a great deal about how to proceed. Your document's excellent. And Dr. Nicolaitis, you're taking a position in an industry where for the past 60 years have been working in the fashion you described. You have a great deal of courage. We received Health Canada last week. It's a bit of a chicken and egg type of situation. Health Canada says we don't have enough studies done about whether or not this is harmful. We don't know enough about the effects, such as lymphoma, in order to be more proactive and set up a registry. But what you're telling us today is that if there had been a registry over the past 20 years, we would now have more data, and we would be able to demonstrate whether or not implants are safe or not. I imagine you agree with me. My first question to you is, why has Health Canada not recognized the breast implant illness?
C'est certain.
I have heard only bad things about Health Canada and from the breast implant advocates such as Julie Elliott's. In terms of why there's a difference between the Health Canada and the FDA, well, FDA was a lot more proactive. Perhaps that's partially because Americans are more litigious, and they tend to do things in a way where they cross their I's and cross their T's and cross their I's. But in all honesty, I don't have a good answer for you. Honestly, I have the impression that Health Canada dropped the ball. Dr. Lennox, when Health Canada approves a product or a device, when you don't have data and you want to protect women's health, shouldn't we at least apply the precautionary principle and be more careful to ensure that, our American neighbors have shown that, one, the BII does exist and that it can cause cancer?
Thank you for the question. So I think to be fair to Health Canada, they felt when they have approved breast implants, which goes back to the 60s, as you've heard, initially they had no data, but over time they felt like they have had data from a safety perspective. Just as point of clarification, BII does not cause cancer. It's ALCL that is the type of cancer. But so I think that Health Canada has tried to collect data from a safety perspective, and they hopefully continue to do that. The question of a registry is long-term data that you can use to give Canadian women numbers that reflect what's happening in Canada. So we would have much better idea in terms of the known complications of breast implants, as well as potential unforeseen events such as ALCL. So I think there's a huge value in the long-term data of a registry.
You're aware that we've lost a lot of decades of data and our ability to demonstrate whether it's safe or not. Don't you think? How much time will it take to set up such a registry? What are your thoughts on that?
It should not take too long. It's being done in most major, in all the G7 countries have already done it. And so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And interestingly, when Korea was setting up their breast implant registry, they actually they did a meta-analysis and researched the current existing breast implant registries in the world. And they published a paper that outlines the key elements of a good breast implant registry and how to build one. So other people have already done the work. We would just have to implement it.
Thank you, Dr. Lennox. Next, Mr. Davies, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to both witnesses for being here. Dr. Lennox, in a 2018 article from CTV News, it quotes you as saying the following with respect to breast implant-associated anaplastic large cell lymphoma. Quote, the numbers that we have seen or that we have identified so far are significantly higher than what Health Canada has as their official data. What explains this gap between the data collected by Canadian plastic surgeons and Health Canada's official data?
That's an excellent question. So that quote is what stimulated all this work that I've done, or the background to that quote. So Health Canada in 2017 had 5 reports of ALCL, and plastic surgeons knew that was far underreported. And so I don't know if, the reporting to Health Canada is voluntary. It requires it. It's mandatory from manufacturers, and if there's an adverse event, but it requires somebody to do that. And the other problem was the actual reporting was it was very difficult to find out how to do it. So I had colleagues who notified me of cases, and they tried to report it to Health Canada, and that was very challenging in terms of the way you could do that. I think part of the reason we were very successful in doing it is that I simply reached out to colleagues. So if somebody heard of a case, I was able to contact them and get all the details of it and keep very accurate information. So I think had a registry been in place that had easy reporting, the numbers would have been much more accurate early on. And it's still unclear, that's the difficulty with the Health Canada data, is we've asked them to share the data so we could look at it compared to the data that we have and see if there's overlap or if there are double counting, and they said they were not able to do that. So I have no idea how they get their data or how robust the data is.
I know there's always a fundamental correlation causation issue in medical science. How strong is the correlation between breast implants and anaplastic large cell lymphoma? And is there a causation element, do you think? Has that been established?
That's a controversial question in plastic surgery, but I personally think, and most plastic surgeons, I think, there is a causation between aggressively textured devices. As Dr. Nicolaitis said, the more textured, the more rough the surface of the device is, the higher the risk of ALCL is. And so I think most people believe there is a causation there.
Just so that I can get the basics here, are silicone gel implants still allowed to be sold in Canada?
Yes.
And are saline-filled implants still allowed to be sold in Canada?
Yes.
I wonder, I also am aware that there's been a lot of complaints from women who've had breast implants of autoimmune issues as a result of having breast implants. Can you tell us anything about that?
Dr. Nicolaitis, do you want to start with that one?
So yeah, these are two completely distinctive entities. They're two problems caused by implants. BIA ALCL is proven, as I alluded to, and as Dr. Lennox just mentioned, it's accepted now that it's the texturing of the implants with, as he said, that is leading up to the ALCL. Now, the exact details of that are not yet 100% clear, but they're being understood more and more over time. BII is a breast implant illness, which is referring to those autoimmune issues you just mentioned. And that's a constellation of symptoms that are very wide-ranging. It's that patients have been complaining about since, as I said, within a year of the introduction of breast implants. These BII can be caused by any kind of implants. There's a general feeling in the BII community that the gel implants are more problematic. But that has not been proven. Once again, conflict of interest is a huge problem. We tried to get a good study going recently. Well, not we, the Americans. And the study was performed by two breast implant consultants who skewed the data. Is a lousy study, but unfortunately, it's the only well-funded study we have so far on BII done by two consultants who frankly don't believe in breast implant illness. It is nevertheless recognized by the FDA. And as I said, if it wasn't for the recognition of BIA ALCL, completely other entity, these patients with BII would still be told now that implants are perfectly benign, that it's all in their heads. So just to be clear, BIA ALCL, the lymphoma, proven, and it's caused by textured implants. Much higher incidence, the more textured the implant is, the more rough it is on the outside. BII, autoimmune illnesses caused by any kind of implant, whether it be gel or saline. Something we haven't addressed, but it is something even newer, is something called BIA-SCC, which is another cancer that was recognized only in September of 2022. That is caused by any type of implant. So this is a cancer now, just in brief, not to belabor the issue. The difference from the BIA-ALCL, this is a more aggressive cancer. It is presenting typically around 20 years after implantation, as opposed to ALCL, which presents about 7 or 8 years after. But it occurs with any kind of implant, saline, gel, textured, smooth, doesn't matter. More aggressive, felt to be very rare. And I think, I'm curious what Dr. Lennox thinks. I'm pretty sure that one will remain rare, since we have had implants on the market since the 60s. And I'm only hearing about this cancer for the first time since September 2022.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. We're going to go now to Mr. Genereux for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to both witnesses for attending here today. I guess just for some background, excuse me, again, committee, and for our eventual report that I'm hoping we'll write out of this, is this was first brought to Parliament in 2004. That is a long time ago, and in my opinion and learning and reading about this, nothing has happened from that first private members bill until today, from the government, the Health Canada in particular, the department, in moving towards a registry. We had in my opinion, a disappointing presentation from the representative from Health Canada here last week, and kind of what any sort of future this might look like. So I guess as I'm learning about some of the work that you've done, Dr. Lennox, when it comes to, I guess the Society of Plastic Surgeons has done with your leadership over the years, there is an unofficial database there. I'm curious as to how much of that, what's captured there. Is it what sort of hurdles have you had to overcome to get that information in creating, essentially going out on your own to do that database?
So that database purely captures cases of breast implant-associated anaplastic large cell lymphoma. And it wasn't that challenging to set it up, in the sense that, there's not that many plastic surgeons in Canada. There's probably between 700 and 800. And it's a pretty collegial group in general. And so anytime somebody heard of a case of ALCL, they would contact me and I could reach out to the individual. And I think there was one time where somebody was not comfortable sharing the data. It's de-identified data, so it doesn't have patient information in it. So the downside to that is that you can't do continuous follow-up and, update it, because I have no way of finding out who the patients are. I could identify the surgeon, but not the patients. And so that's a challenge, but I certainly wasn't comfortable having unofficial database that contained patient names or identifiers. But in terms of, it's a fairly small database. There's not that many cases in Canada. One of the suggestions from Health Canada was that our societies should start a breast implant registry and maintain it. And that was absurd. I mean, the amount of infrastructure and support that would require was not within the scope of a not-for-profit, medical society.
I'm glad you shared that, because that was some of the thinking, I think, from a lot of us here in the room too. I guess getting back to that database, so it doesn't capture patient information. It captures, is it then done by serial numbers of implants?
It's done actually by surgeon. So the surgeon and the province they're in is what I've used as the identifier. And then it has all of the information about that specific case. So the type of implant, when it was put in, when it was taken out, what their symptoms were, any imaging, what the pathology was, what the treatment was, what the outcome was. So it's really robust. And that was the challenge in the most recent call that I had with Health Canada. The challenge was their data is not as robust, and it's unclear how they capture it, and they weren't willing to share it so that we could look at it and see how it compares to our data.
That leads to the kind of the second question about that data from Health Canada. So is it from your perspective, I guess, talking about your database and what Health Canada has today, is privacy the big is that what they're telling you in terms of data?
It wasn't clear when we last spoke with them why they were not comfortable. I mean, I didn't need to know anything about the patients. I just wanted to see the cases and what data they had to see if it was robust data that was useful or not.
So I guess, and on your database, is the reason why you don't track patient information in terms of any sort of follow-up, is that then due to privacy?
Yeah, I don't have there's certain things you need if you're going to have a database that tracks patients. So you need to sort of give the patient a unique identifier so that you don't have their name, but that you can go back and track the patient, and it has to be encrypted. There's all kinds of criteria that should exist, which I don't have the capacity to do. So I wasn't prepared to have patient names in a spreadsheet on my computer.
Thank you, Mr. Genereux. Next, Dr. Hanley, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much to both witnesses for your compelling testimony. Dr. Lennox, I want to continue with you for the time being. As Mr. Genereux pointed out, we had testimony last Tuesday from Health Canada. And first of all, in our testimony from officials last week, I didn't hear anyone say that a registry was a bad idea. I think it was more about the challenges in getting to the point of having an effective registry that many were pointed out. But before I get to that, Health Canada, David Boudreau from Health Canada did describe some steps that Health Canada has taken since 2017, 4 main areas being described in terms of risk assessments, annual reports from manufacturers to discover new or increasing risks, updated and labeling, like labeling implant updates from manufacturers being required, a checklist from patient decision-making. So my question is, some of these interim measures that Health Canada has introduced since 2017, in your opinion, have they been effective? Are we in a better place than we were in terms of reporting and getting safety signals associated with breast implants compared to 6 years ago?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think we definitely are in a better place. A big part of that, to be honest, is due to the work that both Canadian Plastic Surgery Societies have done to educate their members about risks associated with implants either. I mean, at every meeting now, there's talks about ALCL and BII, and there's information that people are learning. And so I think that increases the reporting back to Health Canada of adverse events. And Health Canada has tried to capture data more accurately, I believe.
Great, and thanks for the work that the plastic surgeons have done on that, and for the advocacy as well. I think it's really important. We also heard from Kai Hai, from Ms. Wu, from the Canadian Institute for Health Information. So she talked about some of the kind of setup challenges. So one would be, of course, establishing clear objectives for the registry. And pointed out the differences in a registry focused on safety versus health service activities and outcomes, such as the existing Kai Hai Joint Replacement Registry, that they are kind of different purposes. But also, I think more importantly, the data flow from private clinics is a challenge. Like how would we harness that data from private, mostly when these procedures are carried out in private settings. Also, of course, provider and patient participation, and the whole kind of foundational work and data flows that we don't really have in this country, and pointed out that some registries have actually failed. Both the U.S. and U.K. have had significant challenges in the effectiveness of the registry because of these data flows. So I guess it's just reflecting that there's a lot to get to having an effective registry. In your opinion, how significant are these barriers? Are these barriers that we can overcome? Can we get to an effective registry?
I believe we can. I mean, you're right. There are registries that have had challenges, but there are also registries which have been successful. So Australia has had a particularly successful one. The Netherlands has a very successful one, and the Korean one was set up to be successful. So one of the data flow sort of workarounds is to make it opt out. So you're mandated to submit the data anytime you put an implant in, whether it's in a private clinic or in a public facility, unless the patient specifically in writing opts out. So that's available to the patient to say, I don't want government to have my personal information. But in the absence of that, the provider has to submit the data to the registry. And so, that it's the heavy stick of government, but it's effective.
20 seconds. Before we get there, and it looks like that's somewhere a direction we should be heading in, are there other steps in the short term that Health Canada should be taking or could be taking? Very briefly, I guess.
I don't know the inner workings of Health Canada well enough to answer that.
Thank you. Fair enough. Thanks, Dr. Lennox. Suite, Monsieur Thériault, 2 minutes et demi.
2.5 minutes, Mr. Thériault. In clear decision-making for the patients, do you think that in 2023 patients are completely informed and properly informed? And do you think that we need a standard form showing that all risks have been discussed, all health risks have been discussed, and then there'll be a common signature? Dr. Nicolaitis. Indeed. They started doing that in the United States. It was imposed by Arizona. There were breast implant safety advocates that really pushed for this because they found that practitioners tend to understate the risks. So there is a checklist. I don't think that this has been imposed in Canada. Perhaps Dr. Lennox could answer that question. but this has started to be done in the U.S., starting with Arizona. And we need to ensure that a checklist is established to clarify the complications. If the patient has, I think that we do continue with this as far as the registry is concerned. As far as I'm concerned, is that, as Dr. Lennox stated, this has to be mandated. It can't be voluntary or you can't opt out. This has to be forced. Otherwise, the data won't be put into the data bank, and the guarantee with respect to the implant won't work. We didn't touch on this earlier, but I think it's the responsibility of breast implant companies to provide the funding to ensure that this registry is up and running. It's their responsibility, financially speaking. Thank you.
For 2.5 minutes.
Thanks, Dr. Nicolaitis. I'm going to summarize some of the conclusions I'm drawing from this testimony. There have been long-standing reports of illness caused by breast implants. There is now a clear association with at least one form of cancer. All other G7 countries have established a breast implant registry. I know Dr. Lennox reached out to Health Canada in 2017, over 6 years ago. Yet today in 2023, Canada has no breast implant registry. Are you concerned that breast implant manufacturers or other industry forces are lobbying against this registry?
I don't think so. I don't think they would, in the interactions I've had with them,
Sorry, Dr. Lennox, I addressed my
Dr.
question
Lennox?
to Dr. Nicolaitis, although I'll give you a chance to
I
answer.
apologize.
That's okay.
I think that I don't feel that they've had their chance. They've had 60 years to do something and they haven't. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, as we all know, money talks, and that's been the primary driving force for them, and the conflict of interest has remained. Are they going against the registry? I'm not sure about that, but I think it has to be imposed at this point, whether they like it or not. I don't think they've shown tremendous. They're not against the idea, but I think it does have to be. There's a few criteria. The devil's in the details to make sure that the registry works in terms of good data. It's got to be imposed. It can't be an optional thing any longer, and that's where the government stick comes in handy. And then as I said, the cost has to be assumed by the companies. It shouldn't be by my taxes or the government.
Enough. Sorry, Dr. Lynn, so I want to give you a quick chance to respond. And if it's not really coming from industry pressure, then that means the torpor is coming from within government. And you said in 2017, after reaching out to Health Canada, quote, nothing progressed. We had multiple conference calls and meetings, and there was no resolution. So why is there a resistance in Health Canada, do you think, to establishing this registry that seems so obviously needed?
Well, I'll be blunt. My simple perception was bureaucracy. They told me it wasn't their mandate, and it was possibly CIHI's mandate, and that I should take this idea to CIHI and try and get CIHI to engage. And it just seemed absurd that an individual was trying to be the liaison between two government bodies that were responsible for approving the safety of a device and tracking health outcomes in Canadians, and it was my responsibility to coordinate that. So I can't answer why, but it was like hitting my head against a wall.
Thank you, Dr. Lennox. Mr. Abultayev for 5 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Lennox, what did it take to establish a registry from perspective of technical and the cost to maintain on an annual basis?
Those are excellent questions that I don't have the answer to in terms of the specifics. So I apologize, but I don't know how expensive it would be to set up a database or what the annual cost. I could probably track that down from comparable, like the Australian one, which is a similar sized population. So I could find that out.
What's the cost of the average cost of implant, excluding labor and doctor charges?
They are around $1,000 an implant, roughly, less for saline.
And how many implants we do in Canada on an annual basis, on an average?
I don't know. That number is hard to find out.
So Health Canada have this data. We must know how many we import or how many we produce, and we use a year. Is that correct?
They should be able to know that. How many are imported? There's none produced in Canada.
Do we know for sure if they know or they don't?
I don't know.
So in order to determine what we can be up to commit to have a registry as far as Health Canada, also Dr. Nicolaides suggested that this should be paid by the industry, not by the taxpayers, which is something I agree with. How do we get to that to basically speed up the process if a registry is a must?
So in some of the databases that are referenced in the presentation that I sent, those are funded by industry, and I believe they basically put a surcharge per implant that is used to fund the registry. But there are countries that use that model for sure.
Dr. Nicolaides, would you like to weigh on this too?
Yeah, well, as I said, the NBIR in the U.S. is an optional one, but I did reach out to them to see about it. It's funded there by the Plastic Surgery Foundation, but it's receiving significant funding by the breast implant manufacturers. So I think that's a direct one. It's not necessarily as a tax on the implants themselves, but that's another way of doing it. Certainly, I think at the end of the day, it's the implant companies were supposed to do this, and they failed to in the past, and I think they realized that they have to fund this registry in order to ensure safety of implants.
Any registry as such required legislation at some point. Do you see a way to avoid going through legislation in order to establish something like that?
Is that directed at me or
yes,
Dr. Lennox?
Yes, to both, please.
Dr. Lennox?
I don't know the sort of machinations of government at that level, so I'm not aware of a way within CIHI to do that outside of legislation. I don't know.
But Dr. Lennox, since you're answering this question, you've suggested that we need a registry, and then you've mentioned other models out there, such as Australia and Korea and US. How can we get from you a straight answer on, or a clear answer on what shape of a registry we're looking at, and how can that be done in order to make sure that the registry is beneficial to Canadians?
Well, I provided the guidelines of what makes an effective registry, and I'm happy to go through that. They're pretty straightforward. So it's well established what makes an effective registry, and it would just be a matter of how you implement that within Canada.
Dr. Nicolaides, I would like you to weigh on this, please.
Yeah, well, as I said, in terms of there's a few basic premises. I think Dr. Lennox knows more about the details of the registries than I do, but some basic things to make sure the registry works is that it's mandated that basically an implant can't be put in and the guarantee respected unless, for example, the plastic surgeon has gone through a checklist with the patient initially of all the complications, and the patient understands each and every complication, and then a question of how that they, to make it such that that implantation is not recognized for the guarantee unless it's registered in the Canadian registry, so that it's mandated. And once again, I think it's very practical, and as I said, and I'm going to keep saying it, I think it's the breast implant companies who ultimately have to flip that bill.
Thank you, Dr. Nicolaitis. The final round of questions for today's panel will come from Ms. Suds, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and a pleasure to be with you today. I'm not a typical standing member here, but happy to have the opportunity to interact on this important issue. I know that we have heard in past and a bit today that the safety of medical devices in Canada is a shared responsibility. So the federal government's responsible for regulating the sale and importation of medical devices, and then the provinces and territories are responsible for the delivery of healthcare services, including licensing of healthcare professionals and regulating the practice of medicine. Nothing is ever simple, of course. We did hear that Health Canada, that any requirement for physicians to provide information to a national registry would need to be supported by the provinces and territories, and that adds a layer of complexity. I'm wondering from both of you, and perhaps we'll start with Dr. Nicolaitis first, do you see this as an unsurmountable barrier? Do you have a perspective on how to bring the provinces and territories and the regulatory body really into this conversation?
Once again, sort of like Dr. Lennox mentioned, I'm not really familiar with the machinations at the level of the government, but I think it's so common sense at this point, the need of a registry, and Mr. Thériault certainly brought this forward from Quebec. I don't see why any physicians or organizations would be against the idea. As I said, it's, I think the expense has to be picked up by the breast implant companies, and so it's not something that it's necessarily going to cost. There'll be some cost, but it won't be something insurmountable at the level of government in terms of cost for anybody.
And actually, before we go to Dr. Lennox, can I also expand upon that, just to ask you to comment on the complexities of private clinics versus hospitals and what that added dynamic adds to this issue?
Well, certainly it's just one more reason to have a mandatory registry, because if at the end of the day, in the hospitals, things do tend to get, I guess, better documented. But, and that's certainly an issue with plastic surgeries that will be working in both, you'll have breast implants being used for both private aesthetic surgery as well as for breast reconstructions. But either way, the registry has to involve all these people, because these they're all patients at the end of the day who need caring.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Dr. Lennox, if you'd like to comment as well.
Sure. To answer your second question first, I agree. I don't think it would be a barrier if if there's a mandatory or an opt-out registry in place. You don't have any choice. You would just have to do the appropriate, upload the data. And that's one of the things that's really important, is to make that process simple. A good database, uploading the data into it is an easy thing to do. your first question about the relationship between provincial and federal mandates, that I wasn't aware. I mean, I'm aware of the division in terms of the delivery of care, but I wasn't aware that it seems that if Health Canada is mandated to ensure the safety of devices, that if they put in place a mandatory registry, I can't imagine that provinces would balk at that or interfere in any way.
Okay, thank you both. I think, as I think through this process, to me and in many aspects of the work we do here, it's the dynamic of how we interact with the province and how we can ensure that, despite various responsibilities and roles, that we are able to bring them on side and work well for the betterment, obviously, of Canadians. I'll leave it at that. I think my time is up, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Suds. That concludes the rounds of questions, except that I have one just by way of clarification for you, Dr. Lennox. Mr. Abultayev asked you about the characteristics of a quality registry, and you had submitted a brief to the committee that had 8 criteria on it, and I think you referenced criteria in your answer without actually enumerating them. Is that them, or is there something else?
Well, I think I also submitted a PDF of a PowerPoint presentation that I gave, and that's got sort of a couple of different summaries from, collated from different paper with lots of crossover. I mean, I'll just go through some of them very quickly. Clear objectives, stable long-term funding, independent financially, technically, simple interface and data upload, opt-out model, concise data requirements, and clean data which can be utilized and reported easily. So that's a perfect registry right there if you can achieve that. So there are well-documented guidelines for a good medical device registry.
Thank you, Dr. Lennox, and thank you, Dr. Nicolaitis. I can only imagine how busy you are with the very specialized expertise that you have. We certainly appreciate the time that you spent with us today, and the discussion that we've had here. It will undoubtedly be of great value as we go forward on this study. So with that, colleagues, we're going to suspend while we move over to an in-camera portion of our meeting. Thanks again to our witnesses. The meeting is suspended.
Thank you.